Paul George bounced back in the 2021 NBA playoffs after he embarrassed himself in the 2020 NBA playoff defeat to the Denver Nuggets. He's like what Ben Simmons is now. The whole league was laughing at him, but he recovered after Kawhi Leonard went down in Game 4 versus the Utah Jazz in the second round of the 2021 NBA playoffs. PG carried the Clippers past the first seeded Utah Jazz, and then in the Clippers' first ever Western Conference Finals, they played the whole series without Kawhi Leonard, and Paul George helped the Clippers push that series to 6 games, including Paul George's 41-point Game 5, which forced a Game 6. So PG, he took on the responsibility of being the number one guy when many people thought he couldn't be that guy anymore, but he showed it. And in last year's playoffs, Paul George averaged 27 points per game, 9.6 rebounds a game, 5.4 assists per game, and 34% shooting from 3. So Paul George, a pretty impressive stat line. For most of that playoffs, he was the number one guy, and he showed he could do it for them. The question is, can Paul George win the 2022 MVP? Well, he's shown he can be in contention for MVPs. In 2019, he came third in MVP voting, so maybe this might be the year. But if it is going to be the year, he's going to have to do a lot more for the Clippers. The Clippers are going to need him to play like an MVP with Kawhi for the season, because this is year 3 of the Kawhi Leonard Paul George experiment. Obviously, Kawhi won't be playing this season, but they'll want to be making the playoffs anyway. They still want to be in contention, get that 6 or 7 seed, and see where they go from there. So Paul George, we all know how good of a scorer he is. I think he's going to do even more scoring for the Clippers this year, but I think he's got that in his locker. But one thing I think he will need to improve on is his playmaking and facilitating, because Kawhi is the number one guy. All the attention was on him, and then Paul George got a bit more space. Well, this year, Paul George, along with doing a lot of scoring, he's going to need to play make for his teammates and get them good open looks for people like a Luke Kennard and Marcus Morris, to knock down their shots from a Nick Batum from behind the arc. So, facilitating, if he can become more of a primary playmaker for this Clippers team, which is the role he'll need to take up, and he can do that at a pretty high level, then that's what's going to help his MVP case, along with efficient scoring, like he was doing last year and throughout his career, really. Paul George, we all know, is a great defender, but he'll also be asked to be the Clippers' number one defender now, to guard opposing teams' best players now that Kawhi Leonard is injured. Every time the Clippers had a big game, they put Kawhi Leonard on LeBron, Kawhi and Kevin Durant. Well, now that Kawhi's gone, Paul George, who's a more than capable defender, will have to, take those tasks of guarding a LeBron James, a Kevin Durant, maybe even a Giannis Antetokounmpo. But I think he's a more than capable defender, as I said. He's one of the best two-way wings in the league, and if he is going to become the 2022 MVP, he's going to need to be playing like one of the best two-way wings in the league, both offensively and on the defensive end. And I think he's more, as I said many times, he's more than capable on the defensive end. It's just the offense. So, but if he can have some good defense along with the offense, it's only going to help his chances. And another thing that he will need to be able to do to put him in the MVP race is he's going to have to make sure the Clippers stay competitive without Kawhi. They stay very competitive without him in the 2021 playoffs, as I said, forcing the Phoenix Suns to 6 games in their first ever Western Conference Finals without Kawhi Leonard, getting past the Utah Jazz after Game 4. Game 4 against the Jazz, it was tied 2-2, and then Kawhi went down, and Paul George helped carry them through that series as well. So Paul George is going to, if he wants to become the MVP or even be in the running, the conversation, he's going to need to keep the Clippers competitive like they were in the playoffs. And that's not going to be easy, because it's an 82 game season. It's a long time to keep a team who are lacking their main star relevant and competitive. But I think he could do it, because they showed that they're in a bubble, not in a bubble, in the playoffs, that they're a great team. Reggie Jackson, hopefully for the Clippers, he can keep it up, what he was doing. Nick Batum was great for them last year, and they got some other good role players around those guys. But one thing that will help Paul George's case of becoming the 2022 NBA MVP is he is the only current star on the Clippers as of right now, because, as I say, Kawhi Leonard's injured, so he's the number one guy on this team, and that's going to help him in MVP voting if he has a great offensive season and defensive season, because it's just him. Let's say James Harden has another great season, well, NBA voters will think, but he's Kevin Durant and he's Kyrie Irving, so it's a bit easy for him. Even LeBron, or AD, any Laker, Westbrook, if any of them have a good season, well, they got 3 stars, they got a super team. So the Nets and Lakers, any players in those teams, it's going to be very hard for them to win the MVP. As for Giannis, well, he's won 2 in a row. Voters seem to be cooling off with him, because he was just as good last year as he was the previous 2 years, but no one even mentioned him in the MVP race. And they just came out championship, and people are starting to put more respect on Chris Middleton's and Drew Holiday's names. So now Giannis is a very good team. So I don't see him getting into serious MVP conversation. Jokic, could he do it again? Well, you know, second season syndrome. I don't see Jokic going back to back. And then that leaves people like a Joel Embiid who could easily win the MVP. And there's always a dark horse that comes out throughout the year. But I think that this is going to help Paul George if, as I said, he can have a great offensive season, which he has been having throughout his career, and can become more of a playmaker and a good facilitator for his teammates. If he can improve that part of his game along with his good scoring, and then obviously the defense wins games. So if he can perform on the defensive end with the scoring that we're used to seeing from him and a bit of playmaking, I think he could make a push for the 2022 MVP. But at the very least, be in the conversation for the MVP, and I think he will be, because as I said a couple of minutes ago, no Lakers or Nets players have a good chance of winning the MVP because their teams are stacked. And Giannis, I don't see him getting it either. So, you know, that doesn't leave too many other players out there. It leaves like a Damian Lillard, a Joel Embiid, a Paul George, maybe a Curry, but you know, we'll have to wait and see. But anyway guys, that's the video. Tell me, do you guys think Paul George is capable of winning the MVP this year? Or do you just think, you know, what they did in the playoffs they can't sustain? Because, you know, that could more than easily happen. That over 82 games they can't keep it up for all that time. We'll have to wait and see. But anyway guys, tell me what you think in the comments below about Paul George's chances of winning the MVP. But anyway guys, that's the video. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like the video, subscribe if you're new, and turn on notifications, stay notified. And all that said, I'm out of here.